We didn't talk about the crash because we were halfway between Cape Town and the Namib border in South Africa, doing all the right things at the right time in the right place in the right thing. A big Arctic lorry was coming around a blind bend, and on that blind bend, being overtaken on the blind bend, the pickup truck was trying to overtake the lorry. So poor Catherine was driving. She was faced with, do I smash into the Arctic lorry, the pickup truck, or the rock wall? It was Hobson's choice, so it was horrendous for her. She swerved to avoid. It was a natural instinct, as anyone will do. And as she swerved, it's a high-sided vehicle with a high center of gravity, but that's just a reality. And she couldn't help, but we smashed into the rock wall and rolled. It was a disaster, and I'm there thinking, right, all bets are off. We were both left hanging in our seatbelts, looking at each other, going, what the hell happened there? She looked up at me and saw blood spurting from my head, and I looked down at her and covered in blood, lying at a funny angle. I killed the engine, kicked out the windscreen and dragged her out, and very much in shock. And this is about follow your dreams, because as she was wheeled into the hospital, she gripped my hand and said, we will carry on, won't we? It was a statement of fact.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, yeah, absolutely no way.
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast. I'm joined once again by our great friend and contributor, Adrian Stratta. You may remember that Adrian and I have previously recorded podcasts on change and leadership. Adrian referred during that podcast to Daphne, and Daphne is a Land Rover, and it's all been encompassed now in a book called Dusty Boots to Boardroom, Follow Your Dreams by Adrian, a book that's literally just been released. And rather than me ramble on, I'm going to retire to the corner and let Adrian explain what Dusty Boots to Boardroom, Follow Your Dreams is about. It's not just a travelogue. Adrian, welcome to the Just Great People podcast. Great to have you back.
Excellent, Barry. Thank you. And yes, it's out. Get your copy here. It's amazing. It's been a journey in itself, getting the book out. And it's something that my wife and I did in 2002, which I will explain that in a second. But I wrote it in lockdown. What do you do in lockdown? Well, I was working in the aviation sector, or brackets, wasn't working in the aviation sector, so I had time on my hands. So that was the birth of the book, and the gestation has been quite a story in itself. But yes, Dusty Boots to Boardroom. So the title, Dusty Boots, I spent 20 years or thereabouts in the military. So I was in the parachute regiment. And I decided to leave. I got an MBA, and I wondered how best to use it. What was I going to do? Do I stay and get promoted and what's happening? Or do I follow the commercial path because the old light bulb went on from the MBA? So what do you do? So I was in that whole conundrum. And in that process, I happily and interestingly engineered what became my final appointment to work with the Foreign Office in South Africa, restructuring the South African Ministry of Defence. If all jobs were like that, I'd still be serving in the military. It was a great time. But then what was I going to do? I had no real plan thereafter. You mentioned Daphne. So what is Daphne? Catherine and I had a plan. We had a vague plan. We were both working in disparate careers. She was in the medical profession, and I was in the army, as I said. And we were on divergent paths, and we only came together for our holidays and high days and holidays, like so many people in various careers. And we used to go on safari. So Catherine had not been on safari, and she only learnt of what is a safari the night before on her wedding day during my speech to say, this is where we're going on a honeymoon. And in those days, we could go to Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe and Botswana, which was fascinating. And we got the bug. She absolutely loved it. She really did enjoy it, as I thought she would. So that became a thing, and we were on a later safari in the middle of the Serengeti. It's all in the book, and musing. And I said, do you know what? If I ever leave the army, which I wasn't planning at that time, it'd be fun to drive from London to Cape Town. What do you think? And Catherine goes, that'd be fantastic. Now, I was musing. I was thinking that it will never happen. It was just an idea, something you tuck away in the dark recesses of your mind. Follow your dreams. But Catherine heard, we're going to do this and we're going to do it. So actually, it became a thing. And when I said, well, what we're going to do, where and how do you ever engineer that in your busy lives, in your careers and whatever? Hence me engineering the job in South Africa. And I said I was going to mention Daphne. So I sort of phoned Catherine up from Pretoria and said, hi, how you doing? This, that, and the other. I've got a white vehicle on the driveway. Ah, she said, you've bought Daphne. There was a very long pause. I can say, what on earth are you on about? But to her, it was completely logical. This had to be female. It was a camel, ship of the desert, all this sort of stuff. And we had rather enjoyed watching a television series called Frasier, where Daphne was the English girl who looked after and sorted everything out. So the vehicle was going to look after us, Daphne. And there's times in your life where you just don't say anything. You just got to go with it. And this appeared to be one of those where it was all predetermined logic, which whatever you'd said was irrelevant. So hey, Daphne came about.
And it has to be said that this is on the flip side of a desire to drive the full length of Africa. From my previous history, flying around 475 knots, it used to take, that's over 500 miles an hour, used to take just around about 11 hours. It's a long old journey in an airplane. In Daphne, it must have been quite a daunting prospect, Adrian, wasn't it? Or was it just really exciting because it was sort of unplanned? I mean, how did it?
Well, actually, I should have brought my copy of The Lonely Africa on a Shoestring, The Lonely Planet, because that was the internet of the day. There was no internet of the day, point of fact. And you mentioned flying. Well, it's in the book. I actually learned to fly in South Africa and absolutely loved it, but never kept it up. So flying the length of Cape Town to London, it may have taken you 11 hours in your jet. It would have taken me considerably longer in my Cessna 172.
Yes, yeah, and people do it. Don't know why.
They do.
Yeah.
They do, absolutely. But so we took 9 months to do it. We completed 35,500 kilometers. We were taking the road less traveled, and we were definitely taking our time. And we did 35,500 kilometers on one slow puncture. 2 Land Rovers, 3 clutches, a couple of other, many an oil leak.
2 Land Rovers.
2 Land Rovers, yes.
So there's more than one Daphne here.
Well, there's Daphne 1 and Daphne 2, which is
All right.
So being in South Africa, the ability to augment and change and uprate the standard Land Rover, it's very easy. There's a ready market for getting in the bush and having all the gear. I'd spent my life in the military. I was in the parachute regiment, and we used to throw Land Rovers out of aircraft, and some worked, sometimes it didn't work quite so well. It was a bit of a lottery. Suffice to say, the first ever vehicle I drove was a Land Rover as a kid. And when I was captain of the patrols platoon, I was given 6 half-ton Land Rovers, these little cut-down things. And the average age of these was 1956 or something. I mean, they were very old, and they largely did not work, so we largely did not use them. And I say I've got the cutting edge of the British Army here, I'd like to think, maybe not. But we've got these knackered, and they say, well, if you throw them out of airplane, what do you expect?
Yes, what do you expect? But the interesting thing is that the book, Dusty Boots to Boardroom, Follow Your Dreams, is actually not in its entirety, is not just a travelogue, is it? It's more than that.
100%, and that's the point, really. I mean, yes, it is centered around our journey. We've tried to capture the voice of Africa, so it's not we went from A to B to C. So there is our basic route and what we did, and it's the trials and tribulations, but it's really about the people we met en route. And as I said, amplifying that voice of Africa. It's, if you wanted to emulate our journey, how to do up your vehicle, it's there. I include the bibliography that I used at the time, so of travel as well as vehicles, so there's advice and guidance that's much there. We talk a lot about the flora and fauna of Africa. It's there, it's massive, it's visceral, it's in your face, it's our observations. And I think that's the kind of the star of the show, I would like to think. We met a load of people. We met the cast of thousands. We met all sorts of people from Hollywood royalty. Cookie Gulman features largely, she almost offered us a job in Kenya, which was quite bizarre. We were having supper and realised we were on an interview rather than just enjoying ourselves, which was a bit of
much as you are today. You only came for a cup of coffee.
Indeed. In South Africa, we got loads of help and advice. There's a noted mercenary, Simon Mann, him of the big Wonga deal.
Yeah.
He certainly lent us his Range Rover, which is lovely. Do you want to take that? I'd have loved to, but I just didn't want the responsibility of his lovely plaything, and didn't want to get back to Dover and find all sorts of things welded to the underside of the.
No.
And thankfully, no, I know he's not with us anymore, but he didn't offer me a job, so that was just a relief. So, but I do talk about military things as well. So I talk about military history, certainly of the parachute regiment, and funny events, and indeed my own soldiering on the continent when we pass various parts. So yes, it's a snapshot. It's the idea is it's a snapshot of what is the continent at that time. And had I written it on return, the book on return, it would have been very much we went from A to B to C. 20 years on, it's very much more of a reflective piece. So I've run the Remembrance Parade for the last 10 years in my village. And there was a chap who I took it over from who in 1958, Christopher, he and 6 other fellow medics went from Westminster Med School down to the Belgian Congo in 1958 and back in there what was called elective. It's a sort of work placement phase for 6 months, and they drove brand new Land Rovers in 1958 all the way down and back as their elective. I'm not sure how much medical. I mean, they were repairing the Land Rover. Maybe that's part of the process. So we look at their experiences, and as much as their experiences, their observations, their hopes and expectations in 1958, there's our journey in 2002, and I bring it up to date to today and say, this is what we found. This is not there today, or there's been investment, there's been change, and so forth. But fundamentally, first of all, you could not do our route today because the geopolitical situation would not allow you to do that. But we could not go up through the Congo or Angola or Gabon and up the west coast in 2002, whereas today you can. So and there's always opportunity. And the first thing to say is we're not the first to do this, but every journey is unique. Every journey is different. So our route basically describes a figure of 8, and it's all about the route, really. Where'd you go? I was working in South Africa, in Pretoria, down to Cape Town, through Lesotho, which is amazing, amazing country. And then drove up Namibia, up through Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, Kenya, and then Kenya, Uganda, into Ethiopia, Sudan, and the plan was to follow up through the Nile. That was always the plan. And then actually Libya was opening up, so actually we wanted to go across the northern coast of Libya, but we got stuck in Sudan. We couldn't get up the Nile. We couldn't get into Egypt, despite a previous colleague of mine being the defense attaché in Egypt at the time. It was just administratively not possible. But this is the point about you're saying it's much more than a book, much more than just a travelogue and a memoir. It's about resilience. It's about overcoming the hurdles. And it's how the military mind thinks. So it's the dusty boots to Boardroom piece, which I know you want to get to. But we were stuck in Khartoum, couldn't get north. There were some crazy ideas about 1,000 miles unsupported desert crossing, which we're up for the challenge, but that's probably a bit more than a challenge as a single vehicle.
Yeah.
So do we go left or right? That was it. That was the challenge. And where do we have visas and so forth? We could have gone up into the Middle East across to Port Sudan, but we actually chose to go left, and we drove through the Darfur region, getting held up at gunpoint at one stage, which was quite. I think the thing not to do is to laugh at a guy who's pointing his pistol at your face.
Never laugh at a guy who's pointing anything at your face, really. Particularly
I
if it's got.
wholeheartedly agree with you, but that is what happened. All the things that's happened is this it. And actually, had he pulled the trigger, he'd have probably hit the barn door behind him. It was he was definitely not confident of what he was doing.
No.
It's in the book. I won't spoil the fun. And we blagged our way across the Sahel and into Niger, and we're in Agadez. Africa on a Shoestring had a picture of Agadez on the map, and there was an arrow off saying Algerian embassy. And Algeria at the time was a closed country, had been more or less since independence. So it's very difficult to get into it, certainly not for travellers like us, and certainly not from the south. So we blagged our way, long story in the book, in to see the ambassador, who only spoke French, and Catherine's French is far superior to mine. So he would only ever look at me and said, tell me why you want to go to Algeria. And I said, of course, my wife will explain. In my faltering schoolboy French, she went off like a machine gun, explaining our hopes and ambitions, and this is what we want to do, and completion of our vision and mission. And he never took his eyes off me. At the end again, he said, he asked me to say that again more slowly, please. And I thought, oh, here we go. So of course, my wife will explain. So she did, even more crossly, slowly the second time. And he says, right, come back in 2 days. And we thought, we're not going to get that. And in 2 days' time, there was a big ceremony and presentation of our visas so we could get into Algeria. I focus on Algeria because our route north into Algeria was exactly the same as Christopher Everett, who I mentioned in 1958, came down. The chances of our route being one and the same is quite amazing, really. And Algeria was an absolute revelation, a wonderful place.
It's an extraordinary country, isn't it? Having flown over it, you're over it a long time. It's huge, isn't it? Absolutely huge and desolate.
Yeah, absolutely desolate. I mean, crossing. There's a picture of just a series of oil drums disappearing in one direction. We had a very first generation sat nav, which I bought for flying actually. And like you've all got on your smartphone today, you can go anywhere. There was no maps. We had one map which was Russian, so it wasn't a lot of help. But there's desert law.
Was it a Trimble GPS? Was it a
It
Trimble
wasn't.
GPS?
I forget what it was. It wasn't Trimble.
I remember.
Trimble
I remember.
for us. It was a handheld jobby, which I've still got somewhere. The point was, the oil drums were disappearing in one direction. All the tracks were going in the other direction, and the route said go straight on. Which one do you follow? Well, we followed the oil drums, point of fact, because everything shifts. The oil drum shift, the wind blows. There's various ways of navigating, getting through in the desert, which we did, and it was absolute revelation. The fact that today, although it was done in 1958, coming down, which is like Route 1. Today, it's Route 1 North for people coming north. Like I say, there's where one door opens, another one closes, and it's just a constant shifting advice. And even pre-internet, there's lots of information en route as you go. And that's the point is we actually went up through Algeria, Tunisia, to Marseille, France, Paris for Christmas presents on the way home for tea and medals in Blighty. So we actually went from the very southern tip of Cap Agulhas, the very southern tip of the continent, to the very northern tip in Cap Blanc in Tunisia. Although that wasn't the original objective, it became an objective. And I say it was two Daphnes because we didn't talk about the crash because we were halfway between Cape Town and the Namib border in South Africa, doing all the right things at the right time in the right place in the right thing. We were fresh drivers on the main road, so we weren't even cross country. And a big Arctic lorry was coming around a blind bend, and on that blind bend, being overtaken on the blind bend, the pickup truck was trying to overtake the lorry. Poor Catherine was driving, as I say, fresh, very good driver, very competent driver. She was faced with, do I smash into the Arctic lorry, the pickup truck, or the rock wall? It was Hobson's choice, so it was horrendous for her. She swerved to avoid. It was a natural instinct, as anyone will do. And as she swerved, it's a high-sided vehicle with a high center of gravity. It wasn't unsafe, but that's just the reality. And she couldn't help, but we smashed into the rock wall and rolled. It was a disaster, and I'm there thinking, right, all bets are off. We were both left hanging in our seatbelts, looking at each other, going, what the hell happened there? She looked up at me and saw blood spurting from my head, and I looked down at her and covered in blood, lying at a funny angle. The point of fact, I had a sort of very small cut to my nose. That was where the blood was coming from. But she was not in great shape. I killed the engine, kicked out the windscreen and dragged her out, and very much in shock. And she had actually broken, we found out later, the distal end, the far end of her collarbone, which was quite a nasty break. And I'm thinking, right, all bets are off, kits all over the road. The hero of the hour was the lorry driver who stopped, directed traffic, helped us out. I called the police. We got recovered eventually by the police, who I thought, well, they're going to rip us off.
Was this on the South African side of the border or the Namibian side?
South Africa, yep. Near a town called Harris. And they picked us up, scooped us up, vehicle and everything, dumped it into their big shed. They documented everything, arranged for a hot ambulance for Catherine to Cape Town. And this is about follow your dreams, because as she was wheeled into the hospital, she gripped my hand and said, we will carry on, won't we? It was a statement of fact. And I'm thinking, yeah, absolutely no way. My weak body language. Of course, I said yes. Of course, yeah, we'll sort that out.
Yes, of course. Of course. Not
exactly, Mary, yeah. So Yeah, completely failed on that mission. But so we were stuck in Cape Town. If you have to recover anywhere, as you well appreciate, Cape Town's a beautiful place. We had
Yeah.
friends there, and some friends said, "Well, it's obvious you've got to go and see Dr. Joe De Beer, who." We didn't know. And as soon as we were introduced to Joe De Beer, Dr. Joe De Beer, who is the shoulder expert for the Springboks. So, and he understood what Catherine's medical background was. They met, they said, "Welcome to the third world." It was Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
Catherine knew that our insurance wanted to repatriate us and put plates and screws into a shoulder, and she'll probably have lifelong limited movement and so forth. Dr. Joe said, no, that's no problem. I can operate on you next week. It'll be dissolvable bones. We'll do a bone fusion, and you'll be back on the road in 6 weeks, and you'll have full range of movement if that's what you want. And I'll sort out your insurance for you. Which, to cut a very long story short, is exactly what happened. And she had the operation, the insurance paid for it. And Catherine was determined, if the mission is strong enough, you can bring people through adversity, which is part of the message of the book. And that's what happened. And she is the hero of the hour, really. This was her adventure, and she was going to do it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So there was, okay, we need another vehicle, hence the Range Rover I mentioned from possibly Simon.
Simon Mann.
Thanks, but no thanks. You can take the machine gun
Yeah.
bits off. We found another Land Rover. All our gear we recovered from the police station. It was fitted back on. It was Simon's mechanic, a guy called Hammy. It was brilliant. It was like the A-Team, just sort of fitted out a new vehicle overnight. And 6 weeks later, we were back on the road. Bless her, Catherine didn't want to drive, probably a bit of confidence initially, but the vibrations were quite poor, and she did all her sort of exercises and so forth, and that she was given by the physio. But the reality that if the vehicle had been jolted by something quite heavily and wrenched her shoulder, she just didn't want that risk. Her ambition was to do the driving and go on that whole journey, but there she was, just the passenger, which she adapted fantastically, absolutely fantastic. So she couldn't lift too much and everything else, but we made it work. And it's about adapting, overcoming, and sorting out different roles and responsibilities, which is
In very, very
the whole,
difficult circumstances.
yeah.
What is often forgotten or perhaps not realized is just actually how sophisticated South Africa is in lots of ways, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of medicine. People need to remember that he was back, I think, in the 60s. Dr. Christian Barnard conducted the first heart transplant operation down in Cape Town. It was world-beating, groundbreaking, quite extraordinary. And then I think did the second one. There's a huge amount of capability that was resident in South Africa at the time. And so you've now had this huge smash. It would have probably set most people straight back on the first flight home with their insurance documents in their hand going, right, well, that was a bad idea. And yet there was this drive to continue driving through some of the most, I mean, not only have I flown over it, but I've also, I spent a lot of time in Africa, in Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria. And it's a really daunting prospect. Look, traveling from the airport to the hotel in Lagos required an armed escort. And there you were, two of you, one with a dodgy shoulder, trying to recuperate, blasting north in Daphne 2.
Blasting north is probably not the phrase. You're not going to blast anywhere in the Land Rover. No, but you're absolutely spot on. But it's I do talk about it in the book about security and making your own luck. And we spoke earlier about Cookie Gallman. I mean, I was trying to fly under the radar. I was hoping to take a bit of dust from Cape Town to London, and this shabby vehicle. And we went and stayed with Cookie Gallman in the highlands of Kenya on the Laikipia Plains. And the gift of hospitality, the Askari and the people all washed the Land Rover bright white. And I'm going, no! And I had to say, oh, that's very kind.
My dust. Where's my dust gone? Mind you, there's
5 yards down the road, it was rubbing it.
Yeah.
But my point was, it's how you present yourself as a profile, avoiding the obvious choke point. I mean, there's lots of, I mention about it in the book and what to do if someone pulls a gun on you. Don't laugh at them. But yeah, no, I mean, actually, the whole Darfur battle. It was 5 days of absolute endurance of how to get from A to B. There wasn't a road at the route we were going. At one stage, the track, the sand track, was so eroded. We were traveling at a 45-degree angle because the central hump of has been eroded by trucks. And then at 1 minute, we're in a field up to above the our eyesight because of the maize field. It was like flying in clouds, completely discombobulated. And uh, uh, I remember we drove through. We were on the goat track. I mean, that's the only polite way of putting it. And I drove into this village full of sort of reed huts and rendezvous and God knows what. And it was an absence of people. And this is the Land Cruiser War, and this white vehicle drives through a village. And I was looking for the village or the town of Ed Daim. I'm sure there's a smart way of pronouncing it. So I head out the window to this bloke, old man, who probably saluted me, which was really what's going on here. And I said, Ed Dain, which way to Ed? A lot of gesticulation. Sort of went that way. It was bizarre. It was Benny Hill, it's crazy. But, all sorts of adventures, and it was hard graft from A to B, and that was the hardest part, but actually quite rewarding. And here's the really weird thing: each night we bumped into some form of agency, be it whoever it was, Save the Children or so forth. So many different people. I think I don't know where they got the impression. They thought we were from the British government or from DFID or something like that, and they took it upon themselves to sort of radio on to the next town to see if we've got there. And it was quite amazing, and they were looking out for each other and so forth. And we were trying to make contact on the border with someone from the UN who was going to help us cross into Chad. But even then, when we got to Chad, all of a sudden the language changed to French.
Yeah.
And we met Lucky Luke, the cartoon figure who was on the border. And we thought, what's going on here? And they wanted us to take some people to the next town from the border in Chad. And you see all these 4x4s or pickup trucks loaded with about 30 people in all their gear. And we had 2 people in ours. And Catherine said, "C'est plein, we're full." Just 2 people looking at us. Why? I felt a bit bad. But nah, it's not going to happen.
But Chad is a difficult environment, isn't it? The whole of that part of the world is, shall we say, less than welcoming on many levels, and yet the local people, my experience in Africa is the local people could not be more welcoming and could not be more hospitable.
100%. Couldn't. Yeah, absolutely. I took the words right out of my mouth, and it's how you approach them. Well, in Chad, we're in the middle of nowhere, and we obviously needed fuel. We were pretty lucky with fuel most of the way. Same with sort of food, drinking water. We had measures and stuff, and it's in the book. I won't spoil that. But there was one incident where we went into the market, and we clearly arranged a price for 80 litres of fuel, diesel, and then it was being siphoned out of oil drums. We hadn't had that before. How are we going to measure this? It's all a bit dodgy. And I think it was probably $80. I can't remember the price. And at the end of it, the price doubled with every sort of bucket that was going in. And I said, right, that's it. Call the police. And I was surrounded by loads of people. Catherine, I said, get in the car, lock the door. And so we had this sort of bit of a
that does.
And all of a sudden, this bloke with his flip-flops went off on his little motorbike to go and get the police. So I thought, oh, God, there we go. And they didn't get the police. They got the local UN doctor, Dr. John, who was brilliant, who was a big chap, a big guy from the Cameroons, from the English-speaking part of Cameroons, but he spoke perfect French. And he gave them all a big tongue lashing. They were naughty children. They all behaved like, how dare you, they're guests and this, that, and the other. What was the price agreed? $80, right? Have you got $80? Yes. Here's 5 more. Oh, thank you very much. And they all toddled off. And it was like the big man was spanking them all. And he said, right, come with me. And all he wanted to do was find a drinking buddy. He wanted to sort of offload. And is this out of the frying pan into the fire?
There are 1 or 2 like that in Africa, I discovered.
Yeah. No,
Zimbabwe in particular.
Zimbabwe, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, as I say, on our honeymoon in Zimbabwe, I mean, they've been through absolute nightmare, but they are the nicest, kindest locals you would ever want to meet. The biggest humanity, biggest hearts, and yet they've been through all that sort of drama.
And the picking up on that, there's going to be a powerhouse, I think, that is going to emerge, and I think Africa is that powerhouse in terms of resource, people, population. There are clearly, and we can come on to that next time we speak on the matter of leadership, because with a subject close to both our hearts. But given good, strong, ethical leadership, I think Africa can be a major powerhouse in the geopolitical environment, both commercially and geopolitically. And it's early days still, but it's almost, although it seems a long time, it's not, since since it was basically the colonial environment was running all the way through. I mean, in Mozambique, Portugal only left Mozambique in '74. Angola, similar story. The Brits left Nigeria, in '63, was it? Thereabouts. So it's really a very recent history, the post-colonial era in Africa. And if we imagine having to completely restructure the whole geopolitical environment in Africa in that period, it's a remarkably short period for a continent that is so rich in both intellect and resource.
I pepper the book with our reading on the continent, and you're absolutely right in some respects. I'm not going to doubt any of that. There's, if I remember, I can't remember the name of the author, the Big Daddy, Little Children or something. I can't remember the name of the book. He talks about subsequent leaders post-independence, and you can name them all, Mobutu or Idi Amin or God knows, all of these people. The tribal leader is everything and everyone follows. That time has passed now. Where is the leadership coming? When we were there in 2002, the GDP for Gauteng province, which is Johannesburg, Pretoria environment, was greater than the whole of Nigeria and the continent put together. But here's the funny thing. We were essentially working with the Foreign Office to help enable South Africa not to be Big Brother. They did not want to be Big Brother, despite the fact they had an ocean-going navy, first generation aircraft, air force. But the army had been used as a social engineering tool, largely, because the South African Defence Force was a very effective force. But under independence, the South African National Defence Force had seen amalgamations and doubled in size. And they were essentially using that to assimilate and take all the sort of former freedom fighters of Carter and whoever into that organization. Obviously not taking all the troublemakers, but all the sparks, but the majority of the people, because it was the easy way to manage and assimilate and create harmony. And the ANC had promised all sorts of things to achieve the election, which was probably the right thing to do. But so part of our process was actually the government of the day, South Africa. Yes, it's a lot of wealth, but it was in private hands or in corporations' hands, not in the government, which is interesting. And as for the military, they were trying to ascertain UN money to send their military to do. I mean, just before I went there, they sent their military to Burundi to oversee free and fair elections. Very admirable. But the UN turned around and said, well, you're very rich. You don't need the money. You can do it. So Mandela was hoisted by his own petard, which he was trying to get the money. And so he didn't get that. But there's a couple of watchwords to counteract what you're saying. Firstly, the Chinese have acquired probably all the mineral rights that Africa has. So where are they going to fall back on that problem? Yes, they've had money, but it's just kept them afloat. So that's one thing. Secondly, the problem with the Burundi deployment was AIDS. AIDS was rife throughout the continent.
Yeah.
And the UN, or Mandela, turned to his parachute battalion, Parabats, which had been a very formidable organization, but under the new auspices was less so. And if in those days, back in 2002, if you did not want to go abroad or deploy, or if you had AIDS, you couldn't go. So straight away, 50% of the Parabats didn't go because of AIDS being the largest slice. That's taken away generations of people, which still
I think when I was down there, it was about 1 in 4. I think had AIDS.
About half was in the military.
Half. Yeah, okay.
It was a significant number, and so if you didn't want to go, therefore the hodgepodge organisation went, and of course, like anything, you're sending the military because there's command and control and trust and behaviour and order, routine, and so forth. Well, this was not an experienced organisation that had not been trained, so. For the best will in the world, it didn't work. Neither could they rule mount a replacement organisation because they just didn't have them. So actually, scratch the surface, it wasn't necessarily working. But here is certainly in the experiences that you and I have been to in South Africa, it's a very well organised and contemporary modern state, still is.
Well, and you're entirely correct that China's been ceding influence very, very steadily, very strategically, globally. If you go to the Caribbean, for example, psychiatric hospitals, infrastructure, so Africa, totally correct. And that's an entirely different topic, I guess. But we're now sitting over 20 years since the journey. What was on a personal, professional, emotional level, what are the, if you like, if you were to condense if you like, the non-travel element, but the emotional element that comes from the book, Adrian, what would that be? The takeaways that really have stuck with both you and Catherine since your journey?
100%. So that's the to boardroom piece. So we've had the dusty boots, and that's the boardroom piece. And I think it's right to do it as a reflective piece, and it is a reflective piece. So in lockdown, just after, I mean, Catherine had a lot of health issues and challenges, which I won't go into now, but it's in the book. And she set up a consultancy to help other people with health challenges, and she's done that now. And she was talking about her experiences on through Africa, about resilience and overcoming resilience, because if the mission is strong enough, will it see you through? If the will to succeed, or the aim and ambition, is sufficiently strong. And I was thinking, right, she's actually openly talking about this and using it as a vehicle to explain her resilience and her adaptability, and how to overcome challenges and adversity. Wow. And it's not written in that vein, but it recognizes that. That's the first part. Secondly, I was leaving the forces. I was leaving the security of the forces, and you don't go and find a job in the military. They say, right, your next job is this. Okay, off you go. I mean, you've got a bit of say in it, but not much. Whereas all of a sudden, that security blanket has been pulled, and you've got to go and find work. What work am I going to do? What am I geared for? So actually, if you've got a mission, how do you overcome that? How do you plan for it? How do you manage adversity? I got into the natural part of change, transformation, turnaround, restructuring, and I've been an interim for 20 years, and it's worked surprisingly well. It's great. Hence, that's how we've come to talk. And there's a theme through leadership. So yeah, how do you help a board to restructure? How do you help? And I think there's a bit of reflectiveness in that last chapter about the whole boardroom piece. And just a couple of takeaways really is that in the military, yeah, we get a lot of things wrong, but what we do get is the collective behaviors right, because we train in a collective way. Because you train and you have the luxury of training, and you form, reform, regroup, much like you do in an agile way of thinking today with different organizations, and you all have common processes and you train for those processes. It's not as if you can take a company, take them out of their business, train them up and put them back in their business. You have that kind of luxury in the forces, because it's, you're not always fighting wars, although maybe it might seem like that sometimes. But in a commercial world, you're at the contact battle 24/7. You're there all the time. You don't have this luxury to train in the same way. But what you do is train individuals, which is great. So people go on individual courses, and they get trained, and they advance. But there was a wonderful bit of statistics from Deloitte, I think it was 2016, who said of the $60 billion spent on tertiary education, largely 40% is wasted, because people come out, they're trained, and they go back to the same role, do the same thing with the same pressures, the same limitations, and they never get the chance to utilize their training. Whereas individually and collectively in the military, you are encouraged and empowered and enabled. So actually, as a change and transformational director, looking at how to help motivate and move people along, it's about understanding both it's two things. It's having the hard skills to conduct the change, but it's the soft skills of managing people. So I euphemistically say I manage people and process, have done all my life, but actually it's the managing of people, even though they're not underneath my direct command. You enable those people, and you enable people to flourish and sustain, and remove yourself, because you're not supposed to be part of the incumbent organization. That's not your role. And it's enabling them to sustain that sustainable change, which is where you have the massive, greatest feedback. And that's been a confirmation of my life skills, I guess. And every role you get is different. And there's some ideas and tenets in the book about that. But I think there's some massive takeaways, both from initial learnings from the military, but reflecting how does the military mind work in a commercial sense.
And it was a metaphoric journey from one life to another, with huge lessons along the way at a very personal level. Great, Adrian. I have bought it, dear viewer, dear
It's
listener.
available now at Amazon.
There'll be links to the book. A strong recommendation from Adrian, and also from me. The book is a must-have on your bookshelf. So, Adrian Stratta, once again, thank you very much. We must pick up at our next podcast the matter of leadership, lessons to be learned, and all things various since our last podcast. So from me, Barry Eustance at the Success Consultancy, it's Just Great People podcast. Thank you, Adrian. We look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Barry. It's great. I've enjoyed it.
If you'd like to know more about the Success Consultancy's People, Change, Leadership and Management Framework, please simply click on the QR code or in the link in the show notes below. And please do remember to like and subscribe the Just Great People podcast. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.